Good morning. Welcome to week 2 of differentness. I guess we're probably in like week 10 of differentness, but week 2 of being back together, which is awesome, but doing things a little bit differently. We are trying to keep service to an hour long, and so we're going to be doing a little less singing together. I'm going to do my best to streamline things as I'm speaking. And just want to remind us, and I think this is only going to get harder as the weeks go on and we get more comfortable. But we ask that prior to service that any socializing, which we all want to socialize, that we do that outside until 10 o'clock, and then we'll holler at you, or somebody will holler at you and say, it's 10 o'clock, come on in. We're trying to keep the social stuff happening in an open space, which is one of the recommendations that we've been given. And then we come in together and we can be together for this hour, and then after we're done, we'll go out and socialize back out in the open space. So let's pray and we'll get into what we're studying this morning. Lord, we are just so thankful that we get to be together, that even though there's modifications that we have to that we have and different ways of doing things that hopefully won't last forever, but seem to be the new norm for a while. Lord, just help us to find ways to fellowship well, to continue to love each other and be knit together and maintain this unity that you've created among us and this fellowship and this family. Just pray that as we get into your word today, that we would take seriously Jesus's words here, that we would take seriously his challenges to these religious authorities, and that we would be open to whatever you have to teach us this morning, and that we would walk away different than we came this morning. Pray this all in your name. Amen. So we are going to be in Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 15. Basically, in this section, we have we have kind of a Q&A session. Questions are asked. Jesus answers them in some unexpected ways. And for us, while some of these questions, maybe most of these questions, we wouldn't personally have asked of Jesus, his answers become really important for us in applying them to our life. So let's get right in. I don't have control. I have control. All right. Starts like this. It says, "Then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said." The him is Jesus. They're trying to trap him. They are. Keep in mind the context of this. I know we've been doing a couple different things. It's been a couple weeks since we've been in this, but things are starting to heat up for Jesus between Jesus and the religious leaders. They are not really getting along at this point. The religious leaders are actively seeking a way to destroy Jesus, and they're trying to destroy him through some questions, some tough questions that they're about to ask. And so this is what they said. It says, "And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, for you are not partial in any way, not partial to any. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not?'" So you have these, the Pharisees kind of send their underlings out to question Jesus. I don't know why they do this in particular. I don't know if they thought it might trip Jesus up more if it didn't come from the Pharisees. Like maybe they wouldn't see this coming, because these are their disciples. They're those that are training to be the religious leaders. They're followers that they send over to Jesus to ask him these questions. And they also send this a group of Herodians, which are are some guys who are like Pharisees, but they also were very, very closely aligned politically with Herod and his family. And so I think they're trying to send out some people that maybe Jesus wouldn't recognize. And these guys go out kind of feigning like they're really trying to learn from Jesus. They're like, we just really want to know, Jesus, you're a smart guy. We want to know from you the truth. When really they're trying to trip him up. What's interesting, what they say here, is that in this kind of fakeness that they're expressing, they say some things that are actually very true about Jesus, things that were observable to anyone who was around, and things that I personally love about who Jesus is. We've seen this throughout his life as we've been looking in Matthew, that he is this kind of a person. And they say that you are truthful, that he speaks what's true and what's consistent with the truth, that he has integrity. And that's right. That's who Jesus is. He's truthful. And not only is he truthful in that he always speaks true things and doesn't try to be false with people, but he also teaches the way of God in truth. That when he speaks, he is speaking God's truth. That's the priority of Jesus' life, and the priority of his expression to other people is that when he speaks, he wants to speak the things of God. Another very admirable quality of Jesus, and something that we've seen throughout his life. I particularly like the last two of these. He says, and you defer to no one, which means that he doesn't care about other people's opinions. That he's going to speak the truth, that he's going to say what needs to be said, regardless of other people and what they're going to think of him when he says those things. And that you're not partial to any. So not only does he speak the truth no matter what people's opinions are, but also it doesn't matter who he's speaking to. He says the same things whether you are the highest of the high or the lowest of the low or the most powerful person in the world or the weakest person in the world, his best friend or his worst enemy. He just speaks the truth regardless. And I don't know about you, but when I read these things, I just want to be like Christ. I want to be someone that defers to no one. I want to be someone that is constantly speaking the words of Christ, not my own thoughts, but God's thoughts. And anytime I'm in a conversation and someone's looking for advice, I want to give God's advice to those things, not Nate's advice. And I don't want to be afraid to speak the truth when the truth needs to be spoken, regardless of who I'm speaking to. And in fact, this question that comes up is one of these things that honestly, kind of in my weakness as a human, I want to shy away from these truths. Because what he's going to say here was definitely controversial in his time, and I think is a little controversial in the state of Jefferson, in Northern California, in the United States, and with a people full of independence. We're not going to love what he's going to say here, but he says it. So they say these flattering things to him, and then they ask this question: is it lawful to give the poll tax to Caesar? Now, a poll tax, just so you know, is like a poll just means head tax. So each male adult had to give this tax, and it was a flat tax on every male adult person. So they're asking, do we give this tax? This was a very unpopular tax. Taxes in general were unpopular at the time, as they are today, but even more so in this time, because if you can imagine back in the beginning of our country, they had this chant, no taxation without representation, right? We didn't like that we didn't have a say in our government, that England was making all the decisions. That's what was going on here to the nth degree. They were a conquered people. The Romans just said, you're going to pay us, and their only recourse was to say, okay, and nobody liked that. They didn't like that they were conquered by the Romans. They didn't like that they were occupied by the Romans, and they definitely didn't like paying taxes to Romans. especially because if you didn't pay your tax, the Romans were brutal. They didn't care if you didn't have enough money to feed your family. Who cares about that? Pay us anyway. Flat taxes tend to hurt those who are already hurting, right? If I have to pay, $100 like today, if we had a poll tax, a head tax, if I had to pay $100 a week and I make $150 a week, that's going to kill me, right? But if I have to pay $100 a week and I'm making $5,000 a week, not a big deal. So this was not popular in this time at all. And so they're trying to set him up, because either Jesus is going to upset the Roman authorities because he's going to incite rebellion against the taxes, or he's going to upset many of his followers and the people of the time because they didn't like the tax. So if he said, yeah, pay the tax, then the people that are following him, and many of the people that were actually in his disciple group were zealots and rebels, these guys who just wanted to overthrow the Roman government. And they actually thought Jesus might be that guy. So they were trying to set him up here. But they did it in kind of the pretense of, we just want to know, teach us, Jesus. Jesus says this, but Jesus perceived their malice, saw right through them, and said, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? You guys who are just acting, just pretending? Show me the coin used for the poll tax. And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said, Caesar's. I'll show you an example of a denarius. Okay, that's what he would have been holding up, or something like that, as the Caesars changed, the image changed. But he's holding that up and going, who's on this coin? Oh yeah, that's Caesar, right? Says this. He says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And hearing this, they were amazed, and leaving him, they went away. See, they were trying to trap him by getting him either to support the Roman authorities or to support the people's point of view. And he goes a third way and says, hey, you know what? What needs to happen here is we need to render unto Caesar, render unto the authority in our nation, whether you like that authority or not, what is due that authority. Caesar was in charge of the financial system in Judea. Caesar was in charge, he had the authority to tax the people of Judea. He had the ability to make and enforce laws in Judea. That's what he had, and whether you agreed with it or not, that was the reality of the time. And Jesus says, render to him, give back. It's literally a word that means to pay back or respond the right way. Respond with the obligation that you have toward Caesar. What is that obligation? What does he have? Well, he has all this authority. So render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It echoes for me when I read this. I think of a verse in Romans 13 that I did not put up here, which says, "Render to all what is due them." The context of this is talking about authorities, right? It says, "Render to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." See, both Jesus and the New Testament are consistent in this area of authority and government, that we are called to glorify God by patient submission to authority. It's something, as a side note, I don't spend a lot of time talking about things like this, but as a side note, I've been very impressed with the patience and the submission of our church to this time. It's been a tough time. I think we can all agree. And probably most of us don't agree with the decisions that are being made regarding this. Probably most of us don't agree that we need to have tape on the seats and be spacing out. And maybe we don't agree with that. I don't know. Some of us do agree with that. We're all over the place. But the consistent thing is that we have rendered to our government what's due them, which is they have the authority to make these decisions, and we render to them that authority. We give to them the honor that they're due. Even if the person in that position we don't like, we don't agree with, and that's very common, right? We're very suspicious of our political authorities. We think their motives are likely wrong for the decisions that they make, that they just make plain bad decisions, that they're worldly and they're sinful and they don't honor God with their lives. And that's true of many of our leaders. That was definitely true of the Caesars of their time and the authorities in Rome. But what is consistently the case is we're called to submit to those bad, ugly, incompetent people. See, when we stand before Jesus, the one who spoke these words, we will be applauded for quiet submission, not for flashy rebellion. Yeah, it's much flashier, right? To fight the government, fight the system, right? That's the thing that people are totally on board with. And patient submission is kind of just quiet and unimpressive, right? But that's what we'll be applauded for by this man who spoke these words. Faithfully paying the taxes we owe, not trying to find some way to get away with not paying what is owed. Honoring positions of authority in our world, even if we can't honor the person that's sitting in them and their behavior. So the point on your handout, the very unpopular point on your handout, is followers of Christ are called to submit to authorities, what is due their rank in our society. Followers of Christ are called to submit to authorities, what is due their rank in our society. All right, let's go off of that uncomfortable topic and on to another one here. On that day, some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to Jesus and questioned him, asking, "Teacher, Moses said if a man dies having no children, his brother as next of kin shall marry his wife and raise up children for his brother." This is very true what they're speaking here. Understand the context of who is speaking. The Sadducees were a group of a sect of religious authorities who believed that once you die, that's it. There's no resurrection from the dead. So that's important to understanding what gets talked about here. And they give a principle that actually comes out of Deuteronomy 25 that is basically what was called for in Israel is if a man and a woman marry and that man dies and the woman and the kids are left alone without a husband, which was really, really difficult to be a widow in this time, especially in Moses' time, but even in this time in the first century, that it was the responsibility of a single brother, a brother who hadn't married yet, to come and marry that spouse so that they could be taken care of. I know that smacks against all of our sensibilities about falling in love and all that stuff that we have, right? But that's what was called for. And it's actually very, very caring. So much, in fact, of the law that was given to Israel was just really thoughtful. I guess it came from God, so probably good that it's thoughtful. But I mean, it's just really, really caring for this wife and kids who were basically going to be destitute if they weren't taken care of. So this was a normal thing. But understand, the Sadducees are trying to set Jesus up because they don't believe in the resurrection. Okay, now listen to this story that they're going to present here. It says, "Now there were 7 brothers with us, and the first married and died, having no children, left his wife to his brother. So also the second and the third, and down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had married her." You guys have probably heard of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, right? You guys know the musical, Bless Your Beautiful Hide. Anyway, it's a good one if you haven't seen it. This is 7 brothers for 1 bride, I think is the idea here. So you get the idea that there's one woman, right? the first marries and dies. Second marries, does his obligation, dies. Third dies. Fourth dies. Fifth. At this point, I'd be a little suspicious if I was one of the brothers. I'd be like, why do they keep dying? Like, what's in their food? Like, what's going on here? But it happens that all seven, marry her and all seven die. And then she dies, okay? So he says, who's she going to be married to in heaven? What they're trying to do is they're trying to point out the inconsistency of the position that there's an afterlife. Because how does this even work? She's got to be married to someone. How does this even work? Right? They're trying to prove their point of no resurrection by setting up this ridiculous situation, right? But Jesus answered and said to them, "You are mistaken, not understanding the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they will neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven." Now, he immediately points out their problem, the Sadducees' problem. There's a lot of people that come from a lot of theological areas in our time today. People have their little pet theologies and stuff. In their time, there was definitely a lot of little sects of different, theologies, and he's getting right to the root of the problem that the Sadducees had. And the problem is they didn't properly understand the scriptures. Because if they did, they would not have held to what they held to. And secondly, they didn't believe that God is powerful enough. They don't understand the greatness of God's power. They were looking at it from a very kind of humanistic point of view. They were saying, like 100% of people who live die. And when you die, there's nothing there. I've been to wakes, and there's just an empty shell of a body there. The logical thing to think is, once you die, that's the end. Can you prove to me that there's some sort of a resurrection? Right? They were going from that perspective. Instead of the perspective of going, yeah, is God powerful enough to raise the dead? 100% he's powerful enough to raise the dead. They had a very, very small view of who God is. But he makes a statement here. He says, we will not be married in heaven. And that's, it's important to know we will not be married in heaven, nor will marriages occur in heaven. And it says you'll be like the angels in heaven. Now, he's not saying that you're going to get a halo and wings and be playing some harp, okay? Some people misunderstand this idea. He's saying angels aren't married, right? Neither will humans be married in heaven. And then he explains more. He says, but regarding the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. So he's focusing here on the present tense verbs that God uses when he's speaking. He's actually speaking to Moses. This is out of Exodus chapter 3. He's speaking to Moses about roughly 1400 BC. He's speaking to Moses and he says, Moses, I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. And these guys lived like 600 years before Moses. And so Jesus' point is, God is not currently the God of dead people. He's not currently the God of a dead Abraham. He's not currently the God of a dead Isaac. He's not currently a God of a dead Jacob. Yes, are their physical bodies dead? Yes. But they live on, and he is presently the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. If you've had loved ones who have passed away, he is their God right now because they live on. There is a resurrection. He's trying to make a point here. There is a resurrection. And so again, the crowds were astonished. This was normally the response to Jesus because he always brought the truth very, very clearly. and cut through all the religious rhetoric and debates of the time. And he does it again. Point on your handout, something that we can take away from this little exchange, is the afterlife is a very real thing. It's pretty important. And will operate very differently from this current life. Now, a lot of times the question comes up here, well, that seems sad, that seems disappointing that I won't be married to my spouse in heaven. What is that? How does that work? And all of those kind of questions, I just say, I have no clue. I said this a lot when I was in youth ministry. Students would ask questions like that, and I'd say, stick it on a 3x5 card, put it in your front pocket, and hold on when the rapture comes. Right? Because then you can pull it out and go, hey, God, how does this work? Right? I don't know how it works. Honestly, I think if God tried to explain to us how it worked, we wouldn't get it. We wouldn't understand. And so he just lets us know that it's going to be pretty different. All right, next question. Question number 3 of 4. But the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, don't like lawyers. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? So this lawyer is not what we think of as lawyers today, like, sitting in a courtroom, that kind of thing. This was an expert person in the law. They knew the law backwards and forwards, just like lawyers do in our country today, right? They know the law well. This person knew the law really, really well, and he asked a question that actually was a common question that was asked among religious leaders of the time. You've got over 600 commandments in the Old Testament law, things that God had instructed them to do, and which one's the most important? See, we like things simple. They like things simple, but we do too, right? We just tell me like the one or two things that I need to do. Because I can't think about like 600 plus things all at one time. Just boil it down. And so I think that's why we like the 10 Commandments so much. Is like, okay, we're just going to take those 600 and make it 10. Well, Jesus takes all of that and more, everything that God had ever instructed them to do or ever will instruct them to do. He's going to say really boils down to one or two things. He says this. He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment." Great and foremost are two different ways of saying this is it. This is the top of the heap. If you're only going to look at one thing ever in your life, which you should look at more things than this, but if you're only going to look at one instruction that God has ever given, this is the one you need to look at, which is to love the Lord, love God, and not just love him in a shallow way, not just love him in a conditional way, like in these certain circumstances when I'm with these certain people, and it's comfortable to love him, that's when I will love him. Or I'm going to love him with certain areas of my life that are comfortable for me to love him with, and other areas of my life that are less comfortable for me to love him with, that I'm kind of enjoying not loving him with that area of my life. I'm going to hold on to that. Now he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. That word all, I spent hours and hours in studying it, and I came up with the fact that it means everything. Everything that there is. All of who you are. All of your, and he does compartmentalize it. These three things are said for emphasis. And they're a little bit overlapping when you study them. They're not kind of completely separate categories. So there is some overlap between these ideas, but your heart is the center of your being, of who you are. Your physical, your spiritual, your mental life. What makes up you? What makes Nate up? That's my heart. When you say Nate, when you refer to who I am as a person, that's my heart. It's who you are. Your soul is the life-giving breath that is in you. It's what animates your body. And in fact, when you're dead, your soul leaves. You're unanimated at that point. It's the energy behind who you are and what you do. And mind is obviously the ability to think through things. It's the source of logic and thoughts and what we know comes from the brain now. But it's your thoughts. It's the way you process through things. You put these three things together, and it covers every aspect of who you are. There's nothing. Absolutely nothing that you could point to in your character, in your daily activity, in who you are from start to finish, every moment of your life, your personality, your words, your everything that you are. You're called to love God with everything that you are. I don't know what it is. It has to be our human nature. But we are so prone to compartmentalizing. We're so prone to saying, this is the God part of my life. In fact, we even call those things like my religious life. Like somehow that's some small compartment. Or even we'd say, I've grown that compartment, and it's pretty large in my life, this religious area of my life. And this just blows all of that out of the water. There are no compartments. There's nothing in your life that you are not called to love him with that thing. And he says, this is it. This is all of it. This is the most important thing that you can be doing with your life. Every moment of your life, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter what compartment you're in. Love God, love the Lord your God with all of it. And then he goes on and he says the second is like it. The second is very, very similar. And truly this is a second thing. He is saying like this is the next thing on the list. It really is. But he says it's like it. Meaning, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. Because if you do this is one of the areas of your life. This is one of the compartments of your life. If you're compartmentalizing things, this compartment of your life, the way you love God is by doing this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So you might have lots of different areas of your life, but any area of your life that involves other people, which is a lot of life, I think we can agree on that, then you shall love them as you love yourself. Now, some people would say in our 21st century psychology, which permeates a lot of our discussions on these kind of things, well, you got to love yourself first before you can love others. No, there's no caveat here that says, the second is like it, love yourself. And then the third is like it, love others as you love yourself. I think we would like to put that in. Like somehow we need to figure out how to love ourselves. No, we don't have to figure out how to love ourselves. We all love ourselves. In fact, the person with the lowest self-esteem in the world is pretty self-centered, that person. People say when someone commits suicide, it's because they don't love themselves. No. That's actually, some people would say that's the ultimate form of selfishness, right? And that's true. It really is. It's a self-centeredness that drives someone to that point. We love ourselves. We do. All of us do. We're constantly loving ourselves. We're constantly thinking about our needs, how we're feeling at this current moment, whether I need to shift in my seat to make myself a little more comfortable. We're constantly thinking about how to care for ourselves. It's so automatic, you don't even think about it. Now he says, as you love others, use this really practical principle, which is think about how you would want to be loved. Now, keep in mind, this is not like I'm going to love other people the way, like if they were loving me, I would want them to do this for me. No, it's if I were them, what would I want to do for them? What would I want me to do for them, right? How can I care for you in a way that thinks about you as much as I think about myself, which I think about myself all the time. So how can I care for you? How can I meet your needs, what you need from me? And when we do this, when we're with other people, this is how we love God, with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, is by loving other people. It's by expressions of love for other people. And not loving them what's comfortable for us. Love can be extremely uncomfortable for both parties. Because love is doing what's best for that other person. And sometimes that requires you to spank your kid's bottom, right? It's uncomfortable for them, and I never liked doing it, right? Sometimes that means calling somebody out on their stuff. But think about it. Think about if you were going down a road that was destructive for yourself, and you couldn't see it. You were so caught up in it that you were I'm just locked into this thing, and it's destructive. What would you want someone to do? Let you go to your own destruction? No, you wouldn't want that. You would want someone to come and intervene. Someone to do whatever it takes to get you off of that path that's destroying you. But that moment, that interaction, that calling someone to the carpet is uncomfortable for both parties. But it's love. Love is just constantly thinking, how can I do good in your life? And this is very difficult for us. I would call this supernatural because we are so self-focused. Everything revolves around us. That to take the spotlight off of us and put it on every person I'm interacting with, every moment of interaction with other people, that is extremely difficult. And I think pretty beyond us in our natural state. He finishes off this idea by saying this. He says, on these two commandments, these two instructions that God has given us, the whole law and the prophets depend. Now keep in mind, the law and the prophets was the Bible. You could put the Bible in here, because in their time, that's the Bible they had, the law and the prophets. The whole Bible, everything that God's ever instructed us to do, ever, depend on these two things. These two things are the foundation for everything else. I don't care what instruction God has ever given us, that instruction will always come back to relying on, leaning on these two things, loving God and loving other people. What surprises me about the church sometimes, what surprises me about my own heart sometimes, is I somehow justify, we're so good at justification, and I'm good at justification, we sometimes justify being ugly and mean and selfish and speaking badly about other people, all in the guise of, well, God has given us instructions, and so I'm going to judge others for not meeting those instructions. Or like we always want to clothe our stuff in some veil of religiosity. In fact, you guys have probably all experienced this. This is not going to be a surprise to you. Most of the time when I experience people in the church being unloving to other people in the church, there's some sort of verse thrown in there too, justifying their behavior. That's all bull honky, right? That's all that doesn't exist. Because if you're truly living out what God has called you to do, love will cover it all. All of it, every single moment. Love will cover it all. So we all need to get out of our justifications and recognize that love is it. Love's the beginning and the end. Now, do we need to know God's other instructions? We sure do, because we don't know how to love, and we're not good at it. We need to learn how to love. We need to grow in our love. So that's why we got to learn more all the time. We got to be in the Word, because we got to know how to love God better and how to love other people better. But it starts and ends with love. Pointing your hand out is the most important thing that God has ever asked us to do is to love him with every part of ourselves and love others as we would love ourselves. The most important thing that God has ever asked us to do is to love him with every part of ourselves and love others as we would love ourselves. All right, last question that they ask, and then they stop asking, and you'll see why. It says, now the Pharisees were gathered together, and Jesus asked them a question. What do you think about the Christ, the Messiah, right? Christ is a Greek equivalent to the Messiah. What do you think about this Messiah, this Christ? Whose son is he? So Jesus is now asking the questions, right? Whose son is he? They said, the son of David. That's the rote answer. It makes complete sense. Anytime the Messiah was referred to, he was referred to as the son of David, a descendant of King David, right? He said to them, then how does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet. If David then calls him Lord, how is he his son? Now you got to understand a little bit how the culture worked back then. This is a little bit foreign to us. But the bottom line is parents basically lorded their kids. Okay, and I know that sounds weird, but they were the ones you gave deference to. They were the ones you honored as master and Lord. In fact, many times we have sons and daughters calling their parents Lord. In writings. It's all over the place. So, which, by the way, I think my kids left. Shoot, I was going to get them in on this to start calling me Lord. But they would do this, right? So he's giving this really weird setup for them in their culture. He's like, how is it that if the Messiah was the son of David, that actually his ancestor, his great-great-great-great-grandfather would actually call the Messiah Lord? It should work the other way around. How does that work? And what he's trying to point out is they had a pretty limited view of who the Messiah was going to be. He was going to be a human conquering king. And Jesus is trying to go, he's more than that. He's bigger than that. And in fact, he's standing right in front of you, and let me tell you about him. He's Lord. He's Lord of King David, the most important political figure in all of Israel's history. He's David's Lord, not just David's descendant. And in fact, by just in process, if King David, the great king of Israel, honored the Messiah as Lord, then it just naturally follows that all of Israel should recognize the Messiah as the Lord, as the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the highest authority. But no one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day to ask him another question. They're like, yeah, we're done. He just beats us every time. So we're done. Put on your hand out if you want to fill it in. As the Messiah was always intended to be both a physical descendant of David and Lord over him. And in turn, Lord over us. If the band wants to come up, I'm just going to ask the final couple questions here. We're going to sing one last song together. Just a couple things to maybe walk away with today, and maybe you'll walk away with something different than this, but are you rendering to authorities their due? I think that's something that we struggle with as independent Americans. Are we rendering to authorities their due? Are we honoring them the way they should be honored? Are we submitting to them the way we should submit to them? Are we paying the due that they are due, the dues that they are due? And how are you doing at the most important thing in life? And hopefully, going over what we went over, you know what that is. The most important thing in life is love, hands down. There's nothing else that is more important that God has called us to than to love. And how well are you doing that? And are you doing that in all areas of your life? Do you need to expand that into other areas of your life? Let's sing a song, and then just a reminder that we'll exit pretty quickly, and we'll socialize in the parking lot.